What's up everyone, today I want to talk about one of the best leveling builds for sorcerers in Season 4, and it's a fire build that uses hydras and Incinerate. And I'm going to show you why this is probably the best sorcerer build in the game right now for leveling. You can take on nightmare dungeons 20 plus levels above you, you can melt bosses in seconds, and the best part is you need no uniques, and most of the aspects needed for this are given as part of the seasonal journey. And this isn't just a normal Incinerate build, this is all focused around burning damage and damage over time. So let's talk about the build and how to play it. So it focuses around the new Incinerate aspect that lets us split the Incinerate beam in 3. Incinerate's damage has been buffed, and it also increases burning damage while we're casting it. We combine this with the fire hydras, which have also been buffed. You can now have 2 hydras out at once at a time. Combine this with the serpentine aspect and you can have 3. So what we do is we jump into a pack of mobs, we spawn a bunch of hydras, and we just incinerate everything down, and the burning damage ramps up so high that nothing can survive it. I've tweaked this build a lot over the last few days to get it to a position where it's at the level you see here, where it really does just melt everything. So yeah, we'll go over the skill tree, the Paragon Board, and even some things you can do in tempering to really ramp your damage up. Okay, so let's get into the build, starting with the skill tree. Okay, let's go over the skill tree. So we start at the top, and we take 2 points in Firebolt. Now, you just do this to unlock the core skills. As you're leveling, you can use it, and then as soon as you get better skills, take it off your hotbar. You just need it to unlock the next row. Then take Incinerate. You deal damage and burning damage over time. You're a 5 out of 5. That is our main damage dealer. Then you take Enhanced to burn enemies around you, and then you take Destructive. Enemies deal less damage while burning. This is good because when enemies get to us, they don't just destroy us because we've got a bit of defense. Then you want to take 5 out of 5 in Fireball. Now, this sounds a little crazy because we don't put down the hotbar. We don't use it. We don't do anything with it, but we use it as an enchantment. Enchantment! And the reason we do that is when you kill an enemy, they explode in a fireball for 50% of their damage. Now, when it says 50% of its damage, that's the fireball's damage. So having more points in it means when these enemies explode, they deal more damage to those around them, and you can trigger like a ricochet with it. So it's really good, 5 out of 5 in that. I like it in this build. Then as we come down, we want to put a point in Flame Shield. You can put more in here, but I think 1's enough, especially while leveling. It does a lot. It really pulls its weight, Fire Shield. Then you want to take Teleport, and you want to enhance it to gain movement speed, and then you want to take Shimmering for a damage reduction. Really good for getting in and out of trouble. Big fan of Shimmering Teleport. Then you want to take Frost Nova. This is a stun, but it's also a big damage boost. If you take Frost Nova, and then you take Enhanced Frost Nova, and then you take Mystical, Frost Nova makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, increased to 6 seconds against bosses. So what we do is we jump into a pack, we drop a Frost Nova, freeze everything, which gives us a bit of time to breathe because they're not just instantly attacking. And then you start incinerating. You're incinerating vulnerable enemies. So you get that big damage to vulnerable enemies boost on your initial hits, which is really good. And that's why most of the things we hit drop in the first few seconds. Then as we come down into here, we take our second big damage dealer, Hydra. This summons a Hydra that deals damage and burning damage over time. You want to enhance that. While healthy, they gain an additional head. You're going to be healthy a lot in this build because you have a lot of barrier and stuff. And then you want to take Summoned. Hydra also burns enemies for an additional 60% of its damage over 6 seconds. This is a burning build. That is a perfect talent. Then we move down. We don't take anything in the mastery skills. We come down to here and we can take our ultimate, Inferno. Summon a fiery serpent that constricts things in and deals burning damage over 8 seconds. Then you take this, repeatedly pulls enemies in, and then you take this. While Inferno is active, your pyromancy skills cost no damage. There we go. Now we take a few passives. Killing a burning enemy increases your mana regeneration by 75%. Huge. Everything that's going to be on like constant. Huge. So you want to take that. That unlocks our key passive, and I would take this, Combustion. The burning effects deal 20% increased damage and an additional 2% per unique source of burning damage you've applied to the enemy. And we get a lot of different sources of burning damage as we take a few things here that just proc more burning damage from different areas, which just complement each other really well in this build. Now we just take a bunch of passives. So I would roll up back to here. I'd take Glass Cannon, 6% increased damage. So you max that and it's 18% increased damage, but you take more damage. That's fine. Then you want to roll up to here. Take 1 point in Devastation so you can unlock Elemental Dominance. Your core skills deal, max it, 12% increased damage when cast above 50 mana. This is it's very soft on mana, this build. Some builds absolutely drain your mana every single attack. This build doesn't. This is a very easy to manage build for mana. So you're going to constantly be above 50% once you have the right gear. So that's a really good talent. Then I would move down. I would grab this. Your Pyromancy skills deal 9% increased damage while you're healthy, so max that and go into this one. you deal 21% increased crit strike damage against burning enemies. If they are crowd control, this bonus is increased to 30%. And we've got a couple of ways to crowd control them. So that is a huge boost. When you start seeing those crits go off, those fireballs go off, everything starts to come together. Now we've got another cluster down here. Your pyromancy skills cost 12% less mana and deal 6% increased damage. Double these bonus after standing still for 2 seconds. This is an Incinerate build, so you can do a lot of standing still. You kind of jump in, drop your hydras, and then start incinerating. So again, you're ramping the damage even more. You take this as well. You deal increased burning damage to enemies for each second they remain burning, up to 15% after 5 seconds. And that's great on bosses. The boss fights will last longer than 5 seconds, so the longer the fight goes on, the more damage you deal. It's perfect. Now you'll have a few points left depending on your renown and stuff. You'll have a few points left to spend, and I would say the core of the build is done. You can kind of put the points now wherever you want. You can do what you want with the rest of your points. You've done the basics, you've done the rest. If you want to go into a lucky hit style build, there's a lot of things here for lucky hit. There's one there, there's lucky hit up there, there's some damage reduction here, there's more lucky hit things up there. There's lots of things you can do with this build. There's some more stuff up there for resistances. I personally just keep putting stuff into damage. I mean, I'm going to make a variant for a more end game version of this later on, but for leveling, I'm doing things, Nightmare Dungeons, 20, 25 levels above me, and it's fine. It's completely fine. So I just keep putting them into damage. Conjuration Mastery is great. 3% more damage, 3% more movement speed, and 6% mana regeneration for each conjuration. We have 3 conjurations, so that's huge. And then I just unlock a few lucky hits. Once you put a point in, you unlock the ability to gain that lucky hit bonus, but I don't really play into lucky hit, so I wouldn't stress about it. You could also put that down here if you want. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, that's the build. There are a lot of variants of this build you could try, and I've been trying a few over the last few days to see what works best. Firewall works pretty well. The only problem is it slows you down a lot. You're constantly waiting for the enemy to crawl over your firewall. When they do, the damage is huge, but you're just waiting. Whereas this build I've got right now is extremely fast, which is what you want when you're leveling. There's also, I'm trying to make an Ice Blade version of this where you proc more summons of Ice Blade and you weigh more into the conjurations. But, you know, watch this space, subscribe if you're interested in that. I want to get it working. It's just not as good as this one right now. So yeah, that's the build for now. I'll link it down below. Okay, now for the class specific skills, the enchantments. And number one is a no-brainer. Fireball. When you kill an enemy, they explode in a fireball for 50% of its damage. It's huge damage. You get it early because of the core skill, and it's a damage burst we don't have to have on our hotbar. So it's a win-win. 5 points in that is just such a huge damage burst in clearing big AoE packs. Then for your second option, there are a lot of good things here. Fireball is good. Hydra is good. But I think the best one is Incinerate. Let me know down below if you've tried something different and you think it's better. But I like Incinerate. Every 14 seconds, a serpent spawns and incinerates enemies for 8 seconds. It's another source of burning damage from the Incinerate. And because it says serpent, not hydra, it summons like a serpent. It summons like a snake, not a hydra. So it doesn't count to our cat we have on our hydras. So we can still have 3 hydras and the serpent. So I think this is the best, but let me know if you think otherwise. Okay, so let's go over the aspects. I like to do this on the Mobalytics build. I've got it linked down below, but this is the one I made. It's got the Paragon Board, the skill tree, all the aspects on. It's just easier to show here because you can see them all on screen at once rather than highlighting your items in your inventory one at a time. So this is how I would run. The main things you want, like the primary things to get, are your weapon. The weapon you should be getting the flamethrowers aspect. Incinerate splits into 3 beams, each dealing 85% of normal damage if you get the good rolls. So this is important on your main weapon because you get a double boost in the damage, and it's your main damage dealer. So having it 200% damage boost is very important. So I'd be getting that. That'd be like the first thing I try and get. Then I would go and get Conflagration. Try and get that on your amulet. While channeling Incinerate, your burning damage is increased by up to 40%. Enemies hit by Incinerate explode, burning all surrounding enemies for an amount of damage over 3 seconds. This occurs every 4 seconds. This again is huge. And the reason this is so good and why we want it on our amulet is because not only is the damage good, but when you think enemies explode for burning damage, that applies another source of burning damage. On top of that, we also have enemies exploding with fireball. So that combined gives us a absolutely huge burst of AoE when we first get onto a pack. So I think those 2 are the key ones. Then one that's a little harder to find, but one you should be looking out for is Serpentine. You may have 1 additional Hydra, and Hydra's duration is increased by a certain percent. This is really good because Hydra gives us damage, gives us an extra application of burn, and having an extra one out for longer means we don't have to keep resummoning them. If the fight goes on a little bit longer, they won't run out. So it's really good to have on the ring. On the other ring, I like this aspect of Inner Calm. Deal increased damage, triple the bonus after standing still for 3 seconds. On this build, you stand still a lot. This is a very static build. You get into position, you put your hydras down, and then you just channel Incinerate. So anything that's like gives you a boost for standing still works really well on this build. Okay, next, you want to be getting Engulfing Flames. You deal up to 30% bonus burning damage to enemies who are below 50% of their total life. While enemies are affected by more damage over time than their total life, you deal up to 100% increased burning damage to them. Another absolutely huge damage boost. Now, I've been trying to mix around Engulfing Flames, Conflagration, and Flamethrower between the weapon, the amulet, and see which one gives the biggest damage boost. This is what I found to be the best, but feel free to try them out yourself, see which one you think works best. Let me know in the comments if you find something better, but this is how I've found it to work the most damage. And then after that, they're like your big ones. They're your big damage boosts. And after that, I'd just be going for convenience things. They're like the key to the build, and you can mix the rest around however you want. I like these though. While you have a barrier active, there's a chance to ignore direct damage from distant enemies. We get a lot of barrier as a sorcerer. Damaging an elite enemy on the protector grants you a barrier, absorbing damage for 10 seconds. Again, another barrier. Barriers are like our flame shield. Barriers come from this. So there's lots of good plays we can make with barrier, and it works really well when you want to start pushing nightmare dungeons, or I guess the pit at some point. Ever Living aspect, you take 20 to 25% less damage from crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. Also really good when you want to like frost over and get away. Less damage really helps. And then on the feet, I've got Binding Embers. Flame Shield lets you move unhindered through enemies and immobilizes them, which is also another crowd control. That's how I have the aspects. There is a lot of room here for flexibility, so feel free to try different things depending on what you found in the game as you're leveling, because you know you might not have. I didn't have Serpentine until like level 60. It just didn't drop. I just got really bad luck, but you didn't need it. You know, it does help a lot having a third Hydra, but you don't need it. So yeah, you get the most important ones from the seasonal journey. Anything else you don't have, just patch it with whatever you've got. Yeah, that's the aspects. Okay, now let's quickly talk about upgrading your gear with tempering. So tempering is new to season 4, and if you haven't done it, I'll give you a brief introduction, because tempering is the single best way to turn a build that is like okay into a build that deletes bosses in 2 seconds. If you follow this build and don't temper, you'll be like, I don't get it. I don't get why it's so strong. If you temper it right, it is phenomenal. So let me show you how tempering works. You go to the guy and you go tempering, and any of those tempering recipes that you've unlocked here, you can temper onto your weapons. So, and your armor. So you go to the guy, you go to tempering, and then you just put an item in. So if I put, say, this weapon in, I can temper weapons or offense. And that's the type of tempers you can put on your item. So if I was to go on offensive, and on an ancestral piece, a world tier 4 item, you can temper 2 things. So you can see there on mine with a little shield icon, I have 2 tempers on the item. So you can temper 2 things. So on this weapon here, because it's an ancestral weapon, I can temper weapons and offense. Something like a ring, I could temper offense and resource. Something like an amulet, you can temper any 2 of all of these. So you can pick 2 things that you want to temper on that item. So you put it in, and then you choose the thing you want to do. And say you wanted Pyromancy. This gives fire damage over time, Pyromancy attack speed, critical strike damage. Really good stuff for a fire build. You just click it and you press temper. It doesn't take many resources, and you temper it. And there you see that Pyromancy crit strike damage. If you don't like what you've got, you click the little like the reroll icon, you put Pyromancy again, and you try again. You see there we got fire damage, which is great for this build. If you go into weapons, on the weapon, you want to be getting Pyromancy. Pyromancy has Incinerate size. That's the one I'd be going for. There's chance for fireball projectiles, but I prefer Incinerate size. It's really good for casting like a bigger Incinerate that can like cleave down more things. Then on offense, I would be looking for, it's like a fire one, Pyromancy finesse. This is what you want to get on any offensive items. I like fire damage over time. I'm always going for fire damage over time because that's our burning. If you don't get it, fire's okay. Fire damage is okay. Crit strike is okay. But fire damage over time, if you can get that on a lot of items, massive damage. Then on defense, Pyromancy endurance is pretty good because it gives us flame shield endurance, flame shield duration, pretty good. Failing that, you can get warmth. Warmth is a passive in our skill tree that I believe we heal whenever the enemies are burning. So that's really good to get as well. So Pyromancy endurance on any defensive items. Utility, I would be going for I've been going for natural schemes because you get barrier generation. Having barrier, we have a lot of aspects that give us more damage when we have a barrier, and they improve our barrier generation. So barrier generation works really well. You could also go for Frost Nova size, which is pretty good. But yeah, I like barrier generation. And then on mobility, I've been going for teleport cooldown reduction. All of this stuff just adds up. So when you come into here, I think my fire generation is like 300 here. Damage with fire, 300%. So yeah, make sure you temper. You can get hundreds and hundreds of percent of additional damage by tempering. Okay, now we'll go over a quick Paragon board. This is a leveling build. So it's not a full end game build. It's not full of defensives as of right now, but this is going to be a great one to level with. And if you're playing this build, this has a lot of powerful additional damage things in here. So it's all linked in the build down below as well. So let's go through it. First, you go up the right side and you get the rare node here, 10% non-physical damage. You go up to the node here, and I like Flame Feeder. For every 5 decks purchased in range, you gain 10% increased damage to burning enemies. And you deal 10% increased direct damage to burning enemies. Huge one to get early. You get this right at the start for a massive damage boost. There are better places for it when you reallocate later on, but at the start, this is a massive damage boost while leveling. Then you want to just go in this little scatter around here to get all the different dex nodes. And then you want to go up the left side, that you get non-physical damage there. Then we go up onto the next board, and I would go for the Burning Instinct board. How I would run this is I would go up the right side to grab the node. Your burning damage is increased by 10% of your critical strike damage bonus, plus 1% for every 25 int you have. Again, another huge damage bonus. And then I would leave out the right side. I'd rotate it this way so that I could leave out the right side. You get these damage reduction from burning enemies and leave. Don't do this bit yet. Once you get into here, rotate it this way so that your glyph is here. Go grab these nodes here. Fire damage, 10% fire damage, 5% fire damage. And then in the glyph, I like Pyromaniac. Paragon nodes in the range gain 75% bonus damage to their fire damage and damage reduction modifiers. Every pyromancy skill you cast, every second you channel Incinerate, increases your fire damage by 2% for 6 seconds up to 10%. Another huge damage for an Incinerate fire build. Now you can get these as well when you're doing your defensives, but for leveling, I'm not bothering. I'm just getting pure damage first. And then get all these damage ones, they get picked up by this. Then we go down the middle, and we get these here again, fire damage, crit strike damage, fire damage, crit strike damage. Huge. Get this little cluster down here for damage reduction from burning enemies, because everything will be burning all the time. Head down to the bottom and get the legendary node. Pyromancy skills have an increased crit strike chance and deal increased direct damage equal to 10% of your damage with Firebird bonus, up to 30%. Huge. There's a Searing Heat board. Huge on the Searing Heat board. Then we go down here and we get this little cluster for more fire damage and for fire damage over time. Basically, what we've done here, in as few points as possible, we've got so much fire damage, damage over time, and damage to burning enemies. Then I come back up here and work your way up through the middle here, get damage to burning enemies, damage to elites, and work your way up to the glyph. The glyph here I like is Exploit. For every 5 decks purchased within range, you deal 8% increased damage to vulnerable targets. Now, when we cast Frost Nova, we make everything vulnerable. So we jump in, make them vulnerable, and now we get an extra bonus. Dealing damage to a vulnerable enemy increases your damage by 1% for 6 seconds, up to 10%. Really, really good. Exploit has been an amazing glyph since pre-season. Still an amazing glyph. On the left side, you get the damage reduction from burning enemies and all the stuff around it, and then damage to burning enemies and all the stuff around it. This is where I am right now, and it slaps. You've seen how much damage this puts out at the start. This is an incredible build so far. I'm going to keep playing this, and I'll come out with like an updated end game, pushing the pit dungeon, and you're going to see more defensives in the skill tree. You're going to see more defensives in here, and I'll finish a Paragon board. But for leveling, you can just be that. You can be more aggressive. You've got the barrier, you've got the flame shield, you've got the frost nova, you've got the teleport. You can just be more aggressive in your skill tree, in your Paragon, and in your playstyle. So yeah, that's the build. Yeah, that's everything. It's all linked down below. Everything's here. If this has helped, consider subscribing to the channel. I try and make these builds as in-depth as possible. So if you like this style of video, do subscribe for more. And if you've got anything to add, if you've tried a variant of this, if you've tried this and it works really well, or you've tried the tempering and it's boosted your damage, let me know in the comments. I'm curious how people are finding these builds once they get them live and they level with them. So yeah, let me know. That's it from me. I can't stop playing Diablo, so I'm going to go straight back on there now. Thank you for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.